Before we go deeper, notice what makes what happens when you save $5 a day for 30 years so misleading at first glance. Most people see the surface story and stop there. The value of this chapter is that it changes the lens, because once the frame is cleaner, the rest of the topic becomes much easier to understand honestly. Most people hear $5 a day and mentally file it under not important. That is understandable. $5 does not feel like strategy. It feels like pocket change. And because it feels small, people assume the outcome must also be small. But that instinct is exactly what makes the exercise so revealing. Human beings are not naturally good at respecting tiny repeated actions. We notice big events, we respond to sudden changes, but quiet daily movements rarely trigger emotional importance. That is why small leaks are tolerated and small disciplines are underestimated. The scale feels invisible up close, even when it becomes large over long periods. The title looks like a money question, but it is really a time question. $5 is not the impressive part. 30 years is. Once time gets long enough, small daily decisions stop being trivial because they are no longer operating alone. They are operating with repetition, patience, and in the best cases, compounding. A lot of people think wealth begins when income gets big enough. More often, it begins when consistency becomes real enough. High income without consistency still leaks. Modest income with consistency starts building shape. $5 a day is not powerful because the number is large. It's powerful because it proves whether the behavior is stable. Before we even get to the numbers, it's worth noticing that someone who can reliably save $5 a day is already doing something non-trivial. They are creating interception. They are proving that not every dollar must be available to present comfort. That mental shift is the early architecture of wealth, even before the balance gets interesting. So this is not a motivational slogan about pennies becoming millions. It's a realistic exercise in seeing how small daily decisions interact with time. Once you see that clearly, it becomes much harder to dismiss disciplined saving as too small to matter. The real result is often larger and deeper than people expect. That opening distinction may sound subtle, but it is doing most of the heavy lifting. Once the frame changes, the rest of the story stops feeling random. You begin to see that what looked ordinary on the surface was already shaping the financial result underneath. Now we move from headline to mechanism. This is where the topic stops feeling like a slogan and starts behaving like a real system. Once the mechanism is visible, the later outcomes stop looking mysterious and start looking like the natural result of specific incentives and habits. Let us start with the plain arithmetic. $5 a day is roughly $150 a month, or about $1,800 a year. Over 30 years, without any investment growth at all, you are looking at roughly $54,000. That already matters. It's not life-changing for everyone, but it is far from meaningless. People hear that number and sometimes still shrug because it didn't arrive in one dramatic moment. But $54,000 created from a small daily habit is not trivial. It can fund mobility, margin, debt reduction, a business runway, a property step, or a much better safety base than most people ever build by accident. What makes the number interesting is how little the habit demanded emotionally on most individual days. That is the lesson. Wealth is often built from things that do not feel dramatic in the moment. The feeling is small, but the cumulative result is not. Daily life trains us to trust intensity. Money often rewards steadiness more. The average person often says, "I will save seriously once the number gets bigger." But the number usually gets bigger only after the saving behavior becomes normal. $5 a day works as an example because it exposes the order. Behavior comes first. Scale comes later. Waiting for scale before building behavior is one of the most common financial delays. There is a second layer here too. If you can consistently save $5 a day, you become more aware of where casual money disappears. That awareness tends to spill into other parts of life. You notice subscriptions differently. You notice small impulse spending differently. The savings habit often improves the rest of the system, not just one account balance. And remember, the plain total is the floor. It assumes no growth and no increase in contribution over 30 years. Real life often adds both. Income rises, confidence rises, and if the money is invested instead of simply stored, time starts doing more than just collecting deposits. That is where the thought experiment becomes much more powerful. Once the mechanism is visible, A lot of confusing money behavior suddenly makes sense. It stops looking like chaos and starts looking like the predictable result of time horizon, incentives, and the way people position capital under pressure. This is the point where the cost becomes real. Up to now, the idea can still sound abstract, but Chapter 3 forces the issue into ordinary life. That matters because financial damage is usually underestimated until it gets translated into trade-offs, pressure, and lost future options. Once the money is invested, the story changes. Now the balance is not just a record of deposits, it is a working system. The contributions keep arriving, but earlier contributions also begin generating their own returns. This is the point at which savings stops being pure discipline and starts becoming cooperation with compounding. That is why time is so powerful here. People often think the only path to meaningful growth is much larger contributions. Larger contributions help, of course, but compounding reminds us that a long runway can partially substitute for intensity. Starting early with a modest habit can often outrun starting late with a more heroic amount. At reasonable long-term return assumptions, $5 a day can grow far beyond the simple $54,000 total. The exact number depends on the return path, fees, and consistency, so the point is not to promise one precise outcome. The point is to see how quickly the result changes once the balance is allowed to keep working after the deposit lands. One of the hardest things for beginners to feel is that the later years do more work than the early ones. At first, the habit looks unimpressive. That delayed acceleration is what makes people quit too early or start too late. They want visible proof before the structure has had enough time to reveal itself. This is why compounding has such a different emotional profile than speculation. It does not reward being entertained. It rewards remaining in the system. It likes recurring money, long horizons, low friction, and fewer self-inflicted interruptions. $5 a day works not because it is exciting, but because it is compatible with the kind of system compounding can trust. So the deeper lesson is not that $5 is magical. It is that a small input, consistently directed, can become part of a large system if the time horizon is long enough. That is a very different model of wealth from the one most people absorb from headlines, which is why this simple example is so useful. This is why the damage is usually larger than the headline suggests. It is rarely just a number problem. It becomes a freedom problem, a margin problem, and eventually a future options problem. That is what makes the cost so easy to ignore early and so frustrating later. At this stage, the useful move is reframe rather than blame. The goal is not to admire the problem or panic about it. The goal is to replace a weak money model with one that produces better choices consistently once real life gets involved. There is a psychological shift that comes with a daily saving habit. You stop seeing yourself only as someone who manages money after it arrives. You start seeing yourself as someone who can direct money on purpose. That identity change sounds small, but it often becomes the base for later investing, debt discipline, and smarter spending decisions. Daily saving also teaches interception. You learn that the most powerful money decisions often happen earliest, not after the month is over, not after spending settles, right at the front end, when income first becomes available. That lesson travels well into investing because the same principle governs long-term wealth. Capture capital before the world spends it for you. For many people, the real damage is not only low savings. It is the belief that meaningful progress is impossible without a much bigger life change. A $5 daily habit starts attacking that belief. It proves that motion is possible now, even before everything is ideal. That matters because helplessness is one of the costliest money mindsets of all. Another benefit is that it trains respect for boring systems. Most people are attracted to financial change that looks exciting from the outside, but the habit of saving daily shows that quiet systems are often more powerful because they are repeatable. That lesson becomes incredibly valuable once investing enters the picture. A long saving habit also changes how you feel time itself. Instead of time only being something that increases bills and pressure, it starts becoming an ally. That is a major mental upgrade. Once someone begins seeing time as helpful rather than hostile, long-term wealth building starts to feel much more natural and much less abstract. And of course, once the habit exists, it can scale. $5 can become 8, then 10, then 15. Most people try to start at the final number they imagine they should be saving. A better path is often to start at a number small enough to survive, then let identity and income give you the right to increase it later. Once the model gets cleaner, the behavior can get cleaner too. Most financial progress accelerates only after people stop asking the wrong question and start organizing money around the right one. Better framing usually arrives before better outcomes. Now the idea needs to become operational. Insight only matters if it changes what the next dollars do, what the next rule becomes, or how the system behaves the next time life gets noisy. That is where strong financial content separates itself from interesting commentary. The first thing to remember is not to romanticize the number. $5 a day is useful, but it is not a complete financial plan. It will not erase every structural problem. What it can do is start a real process. That matters because strong financial systems usually begin with small, consistent truths rather than giant, perfect overhauls. If you are just beginning, protect the cash you truly need first. Then, once the system is stable enough, move from pure saving towards sensible investing so time can help more. The sequence matters. Safety first for near-term obligations, growth second for long-term capital. Mixing those roles carelessly creates stress later. Automation is the easiest way to make the idea real. A daily, weekly, or monthly transfer is not impressive in conversation, but it is powerful in practice. It reduces friction and stops the habit from having to renegotiate itself every time life gets noisy. That is how $5 becomes a system instead of a wish. As income improves, the smartest move is usually not to abandon the habit, but to scale it. If $5 built the discipline, a larger amount can build the future faster. The habit is the foundation. The higher contribution is the accelerator. Both matter, but the foundation comes first. Track more than the balance. Track what the habit changes. Lower stress, better awareness, less financial drift, more respect for long-term thinking. A growing reserve, a growing portfolio. The habit becomes more sustainable when you notice the wider system it is improving, not just the number it is producing. So what happens when you save $5 a day for 30 years? More than most people think, and less than financial fantasy promises. You get money, yes, but more importantly, you get structure, momentum, and proof that small daily direction can change a future. If this changed how you think about money, subscribe. We publish 3 videos every week. That is the whole WealthLogic point. Money gets easier to respect once it is organized on purpose. The people who win long-term usually are not responding better to one moment. They are running a better system every month, even when nothing dramatic seems to be happening.